The sun was beating down hard on London that Tuesday afternoon. Derek Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked out of the Crown and Anchor pub. His legs felt wobbly and his head was spinning. He had been drinking for 4 hours straight. Beer after beer had gone down his throat since noon. The reason was simple. 3 days ago, his boss had called him into the office and told him he was fired. 20 years of working at the same company meant nothing. They said the business was cutting costs. Derek felt angry and hurt. The alcohol made everything seem fuzzy around the edges. People walking past him looked like blurry shapes. Cars on the street sounded too loud. The smell of fish and chips from a nearby shop made his stomach turn. Derek put his hand against a lamppost to steady himself. A woman with a baby stroller gave him a dirty look and walked faster to get away from him. He did not care what anyone thought. Nothing mattered anymore. Derek started walking without knowing where he was going. His feet carried him through the busy London streets. Tourists were everywhere. They had cameras hanging around their necks and maps in their hands. They looked happy and excited. This made Derek feel even worse about his own life. Why should they be happy when everything was falling apart for him? He stumbled past a group of Americans who were taking pictures of a red telephone box. One of them pointed at him and whispered something to his friend. Before he knew it, Derek found himself standing in front of tall black gates. Behind the gates was a huge building with white walls and golden decorations. Buckingham Palace. Even in his drunk state, he recognized it. There were hundreds of people standing around. Families with children. Tour groups with guides holding colored umbrellas. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. Derek pushed his way through the crowd. People complained when he bumped into them. A teenager called him a drunk old man. Derek wanted to tell them to shut up, but the words would not come out right. His mouth felt like it was full of cotton. He kept pushing until he reached the front of the crowd. There was a rope barrier that kept people away from the palace grounds. On the other side of the rope stood guards. They wore bright red jackets with gold buttons. On their heads were huge black hats that looked like they were made of fur. The hats were so tall they made the guards look like giants. Each guard held a rifle with a long pointy blade on the end. Their boots were so shiny Derek could almost see his own reflection in them. The guards stood perfectly still. They did not move a muscle. Their eyes stared straight ahead. They did not blink. They did not smile or frown. They looked like statues instead of real people. Derek had heard about these guards before. People said they were not allowed to move or talk while they were on duty. They were supposed to protect the queen and the palace. A loud drum started beating. Then came the sound of a brass band playing marching music. The crowd got excited. Children climbed on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. Cameras flashed everywhere. The changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin. Derek watched as more guards marched onto the palace grounds. They moved in perfect lines. Every step was exactly the same. Left, right, left, right. Their arms swung back and forth at the exact same time. The music got louder. The crowd pressed forward against the rope barrier. But Derek was not impressed. All he could think about was how these guards had jobs while he did not. They got to wear fancy uniforms and live in luxury while regular people like him suffered. The anger inside him grew stronger. The alcohol made these thoughts seem very important and urgent. One guard stood just a few feet away from Derek, close enough that Derek could smell the wool of his red jacket, close enough to see the guard's face under the shadow of his massive hat. The guard's jaw was set firm. His eyes looked ahead without blinking. He held his rifle at attention like a robot following its programming. Derek stared at this guard and felt something boil up inside him. This man probably had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He probably never had to worry about losing his job or paying his bills. All he had to do was stand there and look pretty for the tourists. The more Derek thought about it, the more unfair it seemed. These guards were just for show anyway. They were like actors in a play. They would not do anything if someone actually bothered them. They were too scared to break their precious rules. Derek was sure of it. The ceremony continued around him, but Derek only had eyes for the guard standing so close by. The man did not even acknowledge that Derek existed. He just kept staring ahead like Derek was invisible. This made Derek even more angry. Other people in the crowd were enjoying themselves. A little girl asked her mother if the guard was real or made of wax. An elderly man told his wife stories about when he had served in the military many years ago. But Derek heard none of this. All his attention was focused on the motionless figure in red just beyond the rope barrier. The heat was making Derek sweat even more. His shirt stuck to his back. His mouth was dry despite all the beer he had drunk. But his anger kept him focused. He was going to prove that these guards were nothing special, just regular men in costumes playing dress-up for the tourists. Derek gripped the rope barrier tighter as he watched the guards march. The ceremony was in full swing now. Guards in their red uniforms moved like they were all connected by invisible strings. Every step was perfect. Every turn was sharp and clean. The crowd around Derek clapped and cheered, but he felt sick watching it all. The guard closest to him had not moved an inch. His rifle stood straight against his shoulder. His eyes looked forward like he was staring at something far away. Derek squinted to see if the guard ever blinked. He waited and waited but saw nothing. Not even a tiny movement of his eyelids. It was like looking at a mannequin in a shop window. A family next to Derek was taking pictures. The father lifted his young son onto his shoulders so the boy could see better. The mother pointed at different guards and explained their uniforms to her daughter. They spoke with American accents and seemed amazed by everything they saw. The little girl asked if she could touch one of the guards. Her parents laughed and said no because the guards were working. Working, Derek thought to himself. What kind of work was this? Standing around like a statue while people took pictures, getting paid to do nothing. Derek had worked in a factory for 20 years. Real work with his hands, building things that people actually needed. And where did that get him? Fired and forgotten, while these men in fancy clothes were treated like celebrities. More guards marched past playing their instruments. Trumpets and drums filled the air with military music. The sound echoed off the palace walls and seemed to shake the ground beneath Derek's feet. He put his hands over his ears, but the music was too loud. Everything felt too bright and too noisy. The alcohol in his system was not helping him think clearly. Derek started talking to himself, but loud enough for others to hear. "Look at them," he said, pointing at the guards. "Think they are so special, standing there like robots. Bet they have never done a real day's work in their lives." A woman standing behind him shushed him and told him to be quiet. "This is a sacred ceremony," she said. Derek turned around and gave her an angry look that made her step back. The guard in front of Derek still had not moved. Derek began to focus all his attention on this one man. He studied every detail. The perfect crease in his trousers, the way his boots reflected the sunlight, the brass buttons on his jacket that looked newly polished. Even his rifle looked like it had never been fired. Everything about this guard screamed privilege and easy living. Derek felt his face getting hot with anger. Why should some people have everything while others had nothing? It was not fair. He had paid his taxes for decades. He had worked hard and followed the rules. But when times got tough, he was thrown away like garbage. Meanwhile, these guards lived in luxury just for wearing a costume and standing still. The ceremony continued around him, but Derek barely noticed. More guards marched in formation. Officers on horses rode past with shiny swords at their sides. The crowd oohed and awed at every movement. Children pointed excitedly at the horses. Adults took endless photos and videos. Everyone seemed to think this was the most amazing thing they had ever seen. But Derek saw it differently. All he saw was a waste of money and resources. All these men could be doing something useful instead of parading around for tourists. They could be building roads or helping people in need. Instead, they spent their time playing dress-up and pretending to be important. The guard nearest to Derek shifted his weight slightly from one foot to the other. It was such a small movement that most people would not have noticed. But Derek caught it. So the guard was human after all. He could move when he wanted to. He was choosing to stand like a statue. It was all an act. This small movement made Derek even more angry. The guard was playing a game, pretending to be some kind of perfect soldier when really he was just another person trying to look important. Derek felt like he was seeing through a lie that everyone else believed. A tour guide near Derek was explaining the history of the guards to her group. She talked about their training and discipline, how they were real soldiers who protected the royal family, how their ceremonial duties were just part of their job. Derek listened and felt his anger grow with every word. Training, Derek thought. What kind of training did it take to stand still? Any fool could do that. He had been standing still for the past hour watching this nonsense, and nobody was calling him well-trained. These guards were getting credit for doing the easiest job in the world. The sun was getting hotter and Derek was sweating more than ever. His shirt was soaked and his mouth felt dry as sand. But he did not want to leave. Something kept him there staring at the motionless guard. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was his anger. Maybe it was just stubbornness. But Derek felt like he had to prove something. He looked around at all the people treating these guards like they were special, like they were better than regular folks. It made Derek sick to his stomach. He wanted to shake everyone and tell them to wake up. These were just men in fancy clothes. Nothing more and nothing less. The guard continued to stare ahead with that blank expression. Derek wondered what he was thinking about. Was he bored out of his mind? Was he thinking about lunch or what he would do after work? Did he ever think about the people watching him? Did he care that someone like Derek was studying his every move? Derek decided he was going to find out what would happen if someone actually tried to get the guard's attention. Everyone said they would not react no matter what, that they were trained to ignore everything around them. Derek wanted to test this theory. Derek wiped the sweat from his palms on his jeans. His heart was beating faster now. The idea had planted itself in his mind and would not leave. He was going to touch the guard. Just a quick touch to prove that these men were not as special as everyone thought. What was the worst that could happen? They would tell him to go away. Maybe a police officer would give him a warning. But Derek was sure the guard himself would not do anything. He looked left and right to see where the police officers were standing. There were a few scattered around the crowd, but they seemed more interested in helping tourists with directions than watching for troublemakers. One officer was taking a selfie with a family from Japan. Another was petting a dog that belonged to an elderly woman. They all looked relaxed and friendly. The ceremony was reaching its peak. More guards were marching around the palace courtyard. The music was louder than ever. Everyone in the crowd was focused on the main show happening in the center of the grounds. This was perfect timing, Derek thought. Nobody would notice what he was doing. He studied the rope barrier in front of him. It was just a simple red rope held up by brass posts. Nothing fancy or high-tech. Derek could easily step over it or duck under it. The guard was only about 6 feet away from the barrier. 3 quick steps, and Derek could reach him. A little voice in Derek's head told him this was a bad idea. But the alcohol made that voice sound very far away and easy to ignore. The anger he felt was much louder. It told him that he had nothing left to lose anyway. His job was gone. His savings were running low. His life was falling apart. Why not do something that would make him feel better, even if it was just for a moment? Derek glanced at the people around him again. The American family was still taking pictures. An elderly couple was sharing a bag of peanuts. Some teenagers were making silly faces for their phone cameras with the palace in the background. Nobody was paying any attention to Derek or what he might be planning. The guard remained perfectly still. His face showed no emotion at all. His eyes never moved from whatever invisible point he was staring at in the distance. Derek wondered if the man was even aware that hundreds of people were watching him. Maybe that was part of the training. Learning to block out everything around you and just focus on standing in one spot. Derek took a small step closer to the barrier. Then another step. He was now right up against the rope, so close that he could smell the leather polish on the guard's boots. so close that he could see individual threads in the guard's red jacket, so close that if he reached out his arm, he could almost touch the brass buttons. The guard still did not react. He did not look down at Derek, or show any sign that he noticed someone was standing so close. This made Derek even more convinced that the guards were just for show. Real soldiers would be aware of their surroundings. They would notice when someone was acting strange or getting too close. Derek put one hand on the rope barrier. The rope felt rough against his sweaty palm. His other hand was shaking slightly. Whether from nerves or alcohol, he was not sure. Maybe both. He could feel his pulse in his temples. The sound of the marching band seemed to fade into the background. All he could hear was his own breathing and the beating of his heart. This was it. Derek was going to prove once and for all that these guards were nothing special. He looked one more time at the motionless figure in the red jacket. The man stood like a statue with his rifle perfectly positioned against his shoulder. His face was like stone. No expression. No sign of life. Derek lifted his leg and stepped over the rope barrier. The moment his foot touched the ground on the other side, everything felt different. He was now in forbidden territory. The palace grounds stretched out in front of him. The guard was just steps away. Derek could see other guards in the distance, but they were all focused on their ceremony duties. None of them had noticed what Derek was doing. He took a deep breath and started walking toward the guard. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. With each step, Derek felt more confident that he was right. The guard was not going to do anything. He was trained to stand still, no matter what happened around him. Derek was now close enough to see the guard's face clearly. The man looked young, maybe in his 20s. He had brown eyes that stared straight ahead without blinking. His jaw was set firm, and there was not even the hint of a smile or frown on his lips. Up close, Derek could see that the guard's skin was pale, like he spent most of his time indoors rather than outside training for battle. The rifle the guard carried looked real enough. Derek could see scratches and wear marks on the metal parts. The wooden stock was polished but showed signs of use. The bayonet attached to the end gleamed in the sunlight. For a moment, Derek wondered if the weapon was actually loaded, but he pushed that thought away. These were ceremonial guards, not real soldiers. Derek raised his arm slowly. His hand was now just inches away from the guard's shoulder. He could feel the heat radiating from the red wool jacket. This close, he could smell the starch that had been used to press the uniform. Everything looked so perfect and neat, like a costume that had just come back from the dry cleaner. The guard still showed no sign that he was aware of Derek standing right next to him. His breathing was steady and quiet. His grip on the rifle never changed. He was like a robot programmed to stand in one position forever. Derek felt a moment of doubt. What if he was wrong? What if these guards were trained to react to threats? What if touching one of them was considered assault? But the doubt passed quickly. He had come this far. He was not going to back down now. With one quick movement, Derek reached out and grabbed the guard's shoulder. His fingers pressed into the thick wool fabric. He could feel the guard's shoulder underneath the jacket. It was firm and muscular, real human flesh and bone. Not a statue, after all, Derek thought with satisfaction. For about 2 seconds, nothing happened. The guard continued to stare ahead. Derek began to smile, thinking he had proven his point. Then everything changed. The guard's head snapped toward Derek so fast it made Derek jump backward. In that instant, Derek realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The guard's eyes were no longer staring at some distant point. They were looking directly at Derek with an intensity that made his blood run cold. Those eyes were not the eyes of a man playing dress-up. They were the eyes of a trained soldier who took his job very seriously. The guard's face had changed completely. Where there had been no expression before, now there was focus and determination. His jaw was set even more firmly than before. Derek could see muscles tensing under the man's skin. Without any hesitation, the guard brought his rifle down from his shoulder in one smooth motion. The weapon moved so fast, Derek barely saw it happen. One second, the rifle was pointing at the sky, and the next second, it was pointing directly at Derek's chest. The bayonet on the end of the rifle was now just inches from Derek's heart. "Step back immediately," the guard shouted. His voice was so loud and commanding that people throughout the crowd turned to see what was happening. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. This was not the voice of someone pretending to be a soldier. This was the real thing. Derek tried to take a step back, but his legs felt like they were made of jelly. The alcohol that had given him courage before was now making him feel sick and dizzy. He could feel his heart pounding so hard, he thought it might burst out of his chest. Sweat was pouring down his face, even though he suddenly felt very cold. The crowd behind Derek had fallen completely silent. The happy chattering and camera clicking stopped all at once. Derek could hear someone gasp. A child started crying somewhere behind him. People were backing away, creating more space around Derek and the guard. "Move away from the Queen's Guard now," the soldier commanded again. His voice carried across the palace grounds. Other guards who had been focused on the ceremony were now turning their attention to what was happening. Derek could see them looking in his direction with alert expressions. Derek raised his hands in the air to show he was not carrying any weapons. "I am sorry," he managed to say, but his voice came out as a weak whisper. The guard could probably not even hear him over the sound of Derek's own heartbeat, which was thundering in his ears. The rifle remained pointed at Derek. The guard held it steady with both hands. Derek noticed that the soldier's hands were not shaking at all. They were rock solid, like he had done this 1,000 times before. The barrel of the gun looked enormous from where Derek was standing. He could see down into the dark opening and wondered if there was actually a bullet inside. People in the crowd were now pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Derek could see the light from camera flashes, even though his vision was getting blurry from fear and alcohol. He realized that whatever happened next was going to be seen by millions of people around the world. A woman somewhere in the crowd screamed. Parents were grabbing their children and moving them further away from the scene. The organized tour groups were breaking apart as people scattered in different directions. The peaceful ceremony had turned into chaos in just a few seconds. Derek tried to speak again, but no words came out. His mouth felt completely dry. His tongue seemed to be stuck to the roof of his mouth. All he could do was stare at the weapon pointed at him and wait to see what would happen next. The guard remained perfectly calm despite the drama unfolding around him. His breathing was still steady and controlled. His grip on the rifle never wavered. He kept his eyes locked on Derek, like a predator watching prey. Derek felt like a mouse cornered by a cat. More guards were now moving toward them. Derek could hear the sound of their heavy boots hitting the pavement as they marched in formation. The rhythmic stomping sound got louder and closer with each passing second. Derek knew he was about to be surrounded with nowhere to run. The guard closest to Derek spoke again. His voice was slightly calmer now, but still carried total authority. "Do not move another muscle," he said. "Stay exactly where you are. Help is coming." Derek understood that help meant help for the guard, not help for him. Derek could feel eyes staring at him from every direction. Hundreds of tourists who had come to see a peaceful ceremony were now witnessing something much more dramatic. He wondered what they thought of him. Did they think he was dangerous? Did they think he was crazy? Did they feel sorry for him or angry at him for ruining their day? Police officers were also moving toward the scene now. Derek could hear radio chatter and see blue uniforms pushing through the crowd. He was going to be arrested. There was no doubt about that now. The question was whether he would be arrested or shot first. The guard with the rifle took a small step forward. Derek immediately took a step back and almost stumbled. The guard was herding him like a sheep, keeping him in place until reinforcements arrived. Derek realized he was completely at this man's mercy. "I did not mean any harm," Derek finally managed to say. His voice was shaky and pathetic sounding. "I was just curious. I did not think you would actually do anything." He hoped the guard would understand that this was all just a misunderstanding caused by too much alcohol and poor judgment. But the guard showed no sympathy. His expression remained stone cold and professional. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it properly regardless of Derek's excuses or apologies. Derek was a threat that needed to be contained until proper authorities could handle the situation. The sound of more boots was getting very close now. Derek turned his head slightly and saw at least 4 more guards approaching in a tight formation. They all had their weapons ready and their faces showed the same serious determination as the guard who was already confronting Derek. Behind the guards, Derek could see police officers running toward them. Some were speaking into radios while others were clearing people out of the way. The entire area around the palace was being secured. Derek was now the center of a major security incident. He closed his eyes for a moment and wished he could wake up back in the pub where all of this had started. But when he opened his eyes again, the rifle was still pointed at him, and the guard was still staring at him with those intense eyes. Derek knew his life was about to change forever. The first backup guard arrived within seconds. He moved with quick, precise steps and took position to Derek's left side. His rifle was also pointed at Derek, creating a crossfire situation that made Derek feel trapped from multiple angles. This guard looked older than the first one, with gray hair visible under his tall black hat. His eyes were cold and calculating as he assessed the threat Derek might pose. Then came the third guard from Derek's right side. Now Derek was surrounded on 3 sides with only his back free. But when he glanced over his shoulder, he saw 2 more guards approaching rapidly. Their boots made sharp clicking sounds on the pavement as they marched in perfect formation toward the disturbance. The crowd had backed away so far now that Derek felt like he was standing in the middle of an empty circle. The rope barriers that had seemed so flimsy before now felt like they marked the boundary between safety and danger. Everyone who had been taking happy pictures just minutes ago was now watching with fear and concern. A female police officer reached the scene first. She was tall and athletic, looking with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her radio was crackling with urgent messages that Derek could not understand. She stopped just outside the circle of guards and began speaking into her radio, using codes and numbers that meant nothing to Derek. Derek could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. The sound made his stomach drop even further. How many police cars were coming for him? How many people thought he was some kind of terrorist or dangerous criminal? All he had done was touch a guard's shoulder, but now it felt like the entire British security system was responding. The original guard who had first confronted Derek never moved his rifle away from Derek's chest. His finger rested near the trigger, but not on it. Derek found himself staring at that finger, wondering if it would move. The guard seemed to read his thoughts and spoke again. "Any sudden movements, and this situation will escalate quickly," he said in a voice that carried complete authority. "I suggest you remain very still until my colleagues can secure the area." Derek nodded rapidly to show he understood. He did not want this situation to escalate at all. More police officers arrived. Derek counted at least 6 of them, now forming a wider circle around the guards and Derek. Some had their hands resting on their belts near where Derek assumed they kept their own weapons. Others were taking photographs of the scene with official-looking cameras. One senior police officer with silver badges on his uniform pushed through the crowd. He walked straight up to the female officer, and they began talking in low voices. Derek could not hear what they were saying, but he saw them both looking at him while they spoke. The senior officer had a serious expression that made Derek feel even more worried about what was going to happen to him. A paramedic team also appeared, carrying a large medical bag and what looked like a stretcher. Derek wondered why they thought medical attention might be needed. Were they expecting someone to get hurt? Did they think Derek might collapse from stress or alcohol? Or were they there in case the guards had to use their weapons? The crowd of tourists had grown larger rather than smaller. Word was spreading through the palace grounds that something dramatic was happening. People who had been visiting other parts of the area were coming to see what all the commotion was about. Derek could hear multiple languages being spoken as international visitors tried to understand the situation. Someone in the crowd was providing a running commentary in what sounded like German. Another person was speaking rapidly in Japanese. Derek realized that his moment of drunken stupidity was probably being broadcast live on social media around the world. His face would be seen by millions of people as the man who attacked a royal guard. The guards maintained their positions without showing any signs of fatigue. Derek had been standing with his hands up for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. His arms were starting to ache, and his legs were shaky from the alcohol and adrenaline. One of the younger guards spoke to the original guard. "Perimeter is secure, sir," he said. "All civilians have been moved back to a safe distance. Area is clear for approach." Derek did not like the sound of that. It meant they were getting ready to do something. The senior police officer finished his conversation and approached the guards. He walked slowly and deliberately like someone who had handled situations like this many times before. When he got close enough, he began speaking to Derek directly. "Sir, I am Inspector Williams with the Metropolitan Police," he said in a calm, professional voice. "I need you to listen carefully to my instructions. Your safety and the safety of everyone here depends on your cooperation. Do you understand me?" Derek tried to speak, but only managed a croaking sound. His throat felt like sandpaper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Yes, sir, I understand," he managed to say. "Good," Inspector Williams replied. "Now I am going to ask you to do exactly what I tell you." The inspector looked Derek up and down, taking in his disheveled appearance and the smell of alcohol that surrounded him. "I can see that you have been drinking today," he said. "That explains some of your poor decision-making. But we need to handle this situation properly regardless of your condition." Derek felt a tiny bit of relief that the inspector seemed to understand he was not a real threat. Maybe they would just arrest him and let him sober up in jail. Maybe this would not turn into something much worse. But then the inspector continued speaking and Derek's hopes were crushed. "Sir, you have committed a serious offense by assaulting one of Her Majesty's guards and breaching security at a royal residence. This is being treated as a potential terrorist incident until we can determine your motives and ensure you pose no further threat." The word terrorist hit Derek like a punch to the stomach. He was not a terrorist. He was just a drunk, unemployed man who had made a terrible mistake. But looking around at all the guards and police officers and the serious expressions on their faces, Derek realized that his intentions did not matter anymore. What mattered was what he had actually done. "Mr. Derek Miller," the inspector said, reading from a small notebook. "That is your name, correct?" Derek nodded yes, wondering how they had already found out who he was. "We will be taking you to Paddington Green Police Station for processing. You will have an opportunity to call a solicitor once we arrive." Derek did not know any solicitors. He had never needed one before. His biggest legal problem up until today had been a parking ticket that he forgot to pay. Now he was going to need professional help to navigate whatever was coming next. The inspector closed the van doors with a loud clang that echoed inside the metal compartment. Derek was alone in the darkness with only his thoughts for company. Those thoughts were not pleasant. How had his life gone from bad to worse so quickly? Just this morning he had been an unemployed man drowning his sorrows. Now he was a criminal facing serious charges. The van started moving and Derek could feel every bump and turn in the road. Without windows to look through, he had no idea where they were going or how long the journey would take. The handcuffs made it impossible to get comfortable, and his wrists were already starting to feel sore. Derek tried to think about what he would say when they questioned him. Should he tell them about losing his job and how angry that made him? Should he explain that he had been drinking and was not thinking clearly? Should he apologize and hope they would be lenient? Nothing seemed like it would make much difference now. The van stopped at what Derek assumed was a traffic light. He could hear other vehicles nearby and the sounds of normal life continuing outside. People were going about their day, having no idea that just a few feet away sat a man whose life had just been completely destroyed by one moment of terrible judgment. When the van started moving again, Derek closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for whatever was waiting for him at the police station. He had heard stories about British jails, and none of them were pleasant. But he supposed he would find out soon enough if those stories were true. The police van came to a stop, and Derek heard voices outside. Car doors slammed and footsteps approached the back of the van. When the doors opened, Derek was temporarily blinded by bright fluorescent lights. He was looking at the inside of what was obviously a police station garage. Two officers helped Derek out of the van and guided him through a heavy metal door. The hallway beyond was painted in a dull green color and smelled like clinging chemicals and stale coffee. Their footsteps echoed off the hard floors as they walked past several closed doors with small windows. They stopped at a desk where a female sergeant with short gray hair was typing on a computer. She looked up at Derek with tired eyes that suggested she had seen it all before. "Name," she said without any greeting or pleasantries. "Derek Miller," he replied quietly. The sergeant typed his name into her computer and then began asking more questions. Date of birth, address, next of kin. Derek answered each question while trying not to think about how his sister would react when she found out about this. She was the only family he had left, and he had not spoken to her in months. "Empty your pockets," the sergeant instructed, pointing to a metal tray on the desk. Derek felt helpless with his hands still cuffed behind his back. One of the officers uncuffed him temporarily, and Derek rubbed his sore wrists as feeling returned to his hands. Derek pulled out his wallet, his keys, and his phone. The sergeant examined each item carefully before placing them in separate plastic bags. She wrote something on labels and attached them to each bag. "Your personal effects will be returned to you upon release," she said. "Phone call," the sergeant announced, pushing an old-fashioned telephone across the desk toward Derek. "You are entitled to one call. Make it count." Derek stared at the phone, trying to decide who to call. He did not know any lawyers. His sister would probably hang up on him. There was really no one who could help him. "I do not know who to call," Derek admitted, feeling embarrassed. The sergeant shrugged like this was not unusual. "You can call a duty solicitor then. They provide free legal advice to people who cannot afford their own lawyer." She dialed a number and handed Derek the receiver. A man with a posh accent answered, and Derek explained his situation as best he could. The lawyer, whose name was Mr. Thompson, said he would come to the station within the hour. He advised Derek not to answer any questions until he arrived. "Just give them your basic information and nothing else," he said. After the phone call, Derek was led to a small interview room with gray walls and no windows. There was a metal table with 2 chairs on one side and 1 chair on the other. A video camera in the corner had a red light showing it was recording. Derek sat in the single chair and waited. Time seemed to move very slowly. Derek had no watch, and there was no clock in the room. He tried to guess how long he had been sitting there, but it was impossible to tell. His head was starting to clear up as the alcohol left his system. Unfortunately, this just made him feel worse about what he had done. The door opened, and Inspector Williams entered with another officer Derek had not seen before. This new officer was younger and carried a thick folder of papers. They sat across from Derek and placed a tape recorder on the table between them. "Before we begin," the inspector said, "I want to make sure you understand the seriousness of these charges. Assault on a member of the Queen's Guard is treated very seriously under British law. You could be looking at significant jail time if convicted." Derek's mouth went dry. Jail time. Real jail time. Not just a night in a cell to sober up, but actual prison. He thought about his small apartment and wondered if he would still have it when he got out. He thought about trying to find another job with a criminal record. The inspector continued, "We have video evidence from multiple sources showing you crossing the security barrier and making physical contact with the guard. We have witness statements from dozens of people who saw what happened. The evidence against you is overwhelming." Derek wanted to interrupt and explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but he remembered the lawyer's advice to stay quiet. Instead, he just nodded to show he was listening. His hands were shaking, so he put them under the table where the officers could not see them. The younger officer opened his folder and pulled out several photographs. "These were taken by tourists at the scene," he said, sliding them across the table. Derek could see himself clearly in each photo. One showed him stepping over the barrier. Another caught him reaching toward the guard. The final photo showed the guard pointing his rifle directly at Derek.